All right. So today we're going to be looking at some Greek words and then one Hebrew word, right? Coincidentally enough, this word was brought up yesterday. I was already looking at this. It's a different section than what we were going over yesterday, but the word came up again and it was good food for thought, right? We want to take and glean off teachings when we can, right? And then incorporate it into continuing to spread the word. So today we're going to be looking primarily at Matthew 13, right? Weeds among wheat is what it's called in the NASB 2020, right? And then we're also going to be checking out, because Jesus talks about it, he talks about a parable as well in Psalm 78. That's what he's alluding to, right? And we're going to read a little bit about that. So, no coffee today, just doing water, maybe to slow down a little bit, right? Because that's what we need sometimes. So we'll learn couple new Greek words today, and then one old, very familiar Hebrew word. Maybe some of you have heard it and you didn't read it. You didn't know about it, right? So it says in Matthew 13, the NASB 2020, weeds among wheat. Verse 24. Jesus presented another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field, right? One of the words that we're going to be looking at today is that word good that he uses right there, because there's good seed, but we'll continue for just a moment. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and left, right? So we want to compare and contrast this weeds and then wheat, right? Because the wheat is going to be seen as the good seed in this, right? The word that they use in the Greek is kalos, right? But the word weeds in the Greek is only used here, right? Because some people call it the tares, right? You might have heard, but the darnel. So if you're clicking online, and this is where you might have to like go to a couple of different helps for this, right? So we're going to look at this. The word that they use right there is going to be this zazanion, right? It's going to look completely wild to you reading it in Greek, and even the pronunciation is going to start with a D and then a Z, right? So zazanion, okay? What is it? Well, if you just click on Blue Letter Bible, it tells you it's a kind of darnel, right? Resembling wheat, except the grains are black. So there's clear difference between wheat. I don't know if you've ever seen wheat, but this is going to be the grains are black, right? So it's going to tell you very briefly about that, which they probably could have added a little bit more to it, but they didn't. But if you go to Blue Letter Bible, right, they kind of help you out right here, right? Because they're going to tell you zazanion is this weed, right? But they say tares is what you might have heard. But they also tell you darnel, but it says a poisonous ryegrass weed, a false grain, right? So that kind of helps you out a little bit more. It says specifically darnel, a weed that greatly resembles wheat until ripe, right? So it's going to look just like it. So when we go back to our text now, we're going to be seeing, but while the men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds and among the wheat and left, right? So there was evil, poison sown into that looks just like the wheat, right? It's sown into, planted into the same as the good and left. Verse 26, and when the wheat sprouted and produced grain, then the weeds also became evident. So not until it sprouted and you could see what was inside of it, right, that it became evident. So this is a good lesson for us, right? It's like we often read about in Pauline literature, in his letters. It's talked about good fruit, bad fruit, rotten fruit, if you will, right? So Jesus is talking about the same kind of concept right here, right? So if this man sows this good, this kalos seed, right? And then we also have this zazanion, right? This darnel, or your Bible might say tare, right? So he sowed that as well amongst them, right? But they look just like each other, right? Because how do we know? Well, it's not until they've sprouted and produced grain that everyone, it says, and the weeds also became evident in 26, right? So both parties are evident at that point, right? But people can tell by the fruit that you are producing, right? Like what's in your life. That we've gone over the list several times, and all you have to do is just you can go through Paul and read about, what's good, what's bad, right? The fruit in your life, right? So verse 27, continuing on, verse 13. And the slaves of the landowner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed here in your field? Did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? So they're questioning because it just became evident to them that this darnel or this tare or this proper Greek zuzanion, right? It's only used here too in Matthew 13. So you're not going to have to chase this down too much, right? You're going to be easy to find it, right? He's saying, did you not sow good seed in your field? Because they're the maintainers of the field, right? How then does it have weeds? They're wondering about this. And then he tells them, verse 28, and he said to them, an enemy has done this. The slave said to him, do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, no. While you are gathering up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them, right? So he doesn't want to hurt the good wheat. This darnel or this tare, that will have its time. He says right here in the next verse, in verse 30, allow both to grow together until the harvest. We know this from Revelation 14, right? And at the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather up the weeds, this zazanion, right? Zazanion, and bind them in bundles to burn them. But gather the wheat into my barn. That's that good seed, that kalos, right? Where have we seen this kalos before, right? Well, it's used in the Septuagint, right? And like I said, this just came up in a study yesterday I was listening to. And if you can go back to the Septuagint, right? They've translated, it's right there. You can go to the very start of Genesis, and you can find this in the Septuagint as well, if you know what you're reading for. But in the Hebrew, it's going to be this tov, right? It's going to look like tob, but you're going to pronounce tov, right? Tov. So it's good. So when you're starting to read Genesis, you can read over this good, right? That's that good seed. So what God is making is good, right? So that's the first section of it. We want to relate that to what he's talking about, right? Like a man who sowed good, kalos or tov, seed, right? Then he goes on to the mustard seed. And it says, verse 31, Matthew 13, he presented another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a person took and sowed in his field. And this is smaller than any other seed, but when it is fully grown, it is larger than the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the sky come and nest in its branches. Coming up right here is the verse I want to focus on, right? Because we're going to be talking about parables. Why these parables, right? And it's going to lead us to a very important what Jesus quotes right here. So I'll read the next 3 verses, and then we'll go to what he's talking about, right? Where it relates to this. So the title's in 11 in the 2020. Verse 33. He spoke another parable to them. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 seah of flour until it was all leavened, right? They didn't translate that word for you, but they kept that one unique. It's a Hebrew measure totaling about 48 pounds, right? Lot. That's a lot of flour. 34. All these things Jesus spoke to the crowds in parables, and he did not speak anything to them without a parable, right? And why? All these things Jesus spoke to the crowds in parables, and he did not speak anything to them without a parable. He's about to explain it right here, right? Verse 35. This was so that what was spoken through the prophet would be fulfilled. Who's he talking about right here? Who he's about to quote? He's about to quote Psalm 78, verse 2. It's a very long psalm. It's like 70, something verses, 77, 75, somewhere right in there. It's very long. I was considering reading it today, but really we're going to go back and just focus on that for a second. But it says, I will open my mouth in parables. I will proclaim things hidden since the foundation of the world, right? So Psalm 78, NASB 2020, we'll read the first two verses because Jesus quotes, talking about verse number 2 right here. It says, listen, my people, to my instruction. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. He says this in the Old Testament, right? I will tell riddles of old. So we really need to talk about that. What's he talking about? So we can go to just a quick little discussion on that. A method, what is a parable? It's a method of revealing divine truths that require contemplation and spiritual insight to understand. So do you want to follow Jesus? Do you want to be with him? Where's your heart at? Do you want to be there? Are you going to take the time to give this contemplation, this deep thought, right? And this spiritual insight, right? Well, that's where you need to pray for wisdom to understand, because you can look at these parables and he's actually going to explain this one for you. I recommend going back and reading Psalm 78 if you get a chance. I'll tell you how many verses it is. It's rather long. It's 72 verses in the 2020. But it's worth it, right? Because it's one of those Psalms that you want to read like at a new year or like the start of something new, right? Because it's all about remembering. And he tells you about some hard times, people's mistakes that they've gone through. But he says, he's telling you this in order for you not to forget these things. And in the very end of Psalm 78, it's actually really cool because it turns back. It leads into the line of David, right? So the culmination is a setting up of the house of David, right? And the throne that would guide the people. Who's of the line of David? Jesus is of the line of David, right? That's why it's so important, because it's leading up to this, like, what is it? In Samuel, he talks about, he makes this covenant with him. So keep that in mind when you're reading over this, right? But going back to the original text, Matthew 13, the weeds explain. So he explains this one to you, right? Who does he explain it to? His disciples, right? Because in verse 36 it says, then he left the crowds. So he's no longer around everyone, right? That he was just speaking. He told you why, because in 78, he told you, 78:2 is what he's quoting right there. He left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and said, explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field, right? So explain to us, being the disciples, right? Not too hard to figure out. He's telling them because they want to know they are with Jesus, right? They are walking with him. They want to be on his side. They want to have this deep, intimate knowledge with Christ, right? And then he goes on to explain it, which I'll just let you read for yourself, right? It's verses 37 through 43, right? He's explaining it to you, so I don't have to second behind somebody. I don't have to stand behind somebody and just repeat the same thing that he's telling you, right? But one thing, if you want to look up today, look up this Greek word. It's going to be G2215. We've said it several times. Zuzanion, right? It's only used in Matthew 13. So it's this darnel. Yours might say tear. It's a poisonous ryegrass weed, right? And there's a lot of good studies on that. As I was reading through some commentary, the NIGTC commentary on Matthew, actually on chapter 13, verse 25, actually he only writes it in the Greek, right? So you're going to have to recognize that those what look like kind of like Z's, right? Zazanion. But once you recognize that, he doesn't make it terribly hard. He just uses the one word, and it's a very unique word, right? So anytime you see it, you can just think, and you can write it out for yourself, or you can go to Blue Letter Bible and have this guy pronounce it for you. Zuzanion, right? So you can read about it, and he talks about it, right? He's talking about it. Maybe it's a potential Semitic loan word. The sense may be related to the root Z and H, meaning to be degenerate or degraded, and used largely in connection with infidelity and prostitution. He talks a lot about this word, just that one, right? Because all the other translations, they didn't give it too much thought. And I thought, being such a unique word and such a powerful word, showing that there's two kinds of seed being planted, there's a good seed and a bad seed, seeing as how they look like each other, there could be tons of sermons about this if you wanted to preach the truth, right? I'll leave that up to you. So the other word we learned is kalos, right? That's a very common word. It's G2570, Golf 2570. And then that relates back, in case you do read Greek, you can go back and find that word in the Septuagint, right? So you can read it, like I said, starting all the way back in Genesis chapter 1, when God makes things, they're good. Or if you can read Hebrew, it's the tov, right? It's tov. So keep that in mind when you're going over this. You can also study a little bit of Psalm 78 if you want to. So if you woke up today and you said, I don't have anything to read, well, here you go. You've got plenty to read now. So kind of a shorter day, but that's just where I wanted to lead you guys and gals to, right? So that way you can find it and help, right? So that one commentary, if it was also followed by several others, right? So you can read some on RT France. He does this New International Commentary, NIC, NICOT, or some people, NICNT is the acronym for that, right? Because we all know we need more acronyms, right? No, we don't, right? So the parable of the mustard seed, but he talks about all of that and he breaks it down pretty good. But if you want a real good kind of lesson on, maybe you can look into this if you're into word study, right? For that bad seed, that darnel, or that tear, right? I would really lead you towards the NIGTC commentary on Matthew, right? That's the New International Greek Testament commentary. What a mouthful, right? So keep you on board with that. And then I also was reading, which I don't think it did quite as good of a job. Normally I'm a bigger fan of Leon Morris, but he has a commentary on Matthew as well from the Gospel according to Matthew. Leon Morris. It's okay, but it's very short. If you're trying to get deeper into it, right? He does an all right job. Just buy whichever one's on sale, whichever one you can afford, really, in all honesty. But those are some to help get you started in this, right? So I hope you all have a beautiful day. I'm just looking, I don't see any comments, so I hope you've learned something. Once again, I'm just going to give you the alphanumeric numbers for these. G2215, G2570, and then H2896. So you can have a good time with those. You can also go to Bill Mounts. He has a website, that can also help. So in case you don't want to bounce between Bible Hub, Blue Letter Bible, which I recommend reading both on every word that you look up. But Bill Mounts also has this word. He's going to talk about that word: good, right, beautiful, fine, excellent. It's pretty good job. I don't use his website a lot, but it's just a third option in case you're, not familiar, in case you don't like the other two, right? Just one more choice. All right. I love you all. Have a beautiful day.